Picture this. It's midnight, July 30th, 1945. You're in the middle of the vast, dark Philippine Sea, and the world has just been reduced to the sound of screaming and the awful taste of fuel oil. This isn't a battle you're witnessing. This is the aftermath. And for hundreds of American sailors, the single greatest naval disaster in U.S. history has only just begun. This is the harrowing story of the USS Indianapolis. I want you to try and imagine that for a second. You're floating in the pitch-black ocean, and you are covered head to toe in a thick, choking coat of bunker oil. As Dr. Haynes said, you can't recognize the man floating right next to you. In fact, you can't even recognize yourself. You're not an individual anymore. You're just one of hundreds of identical, terrified figures bobbing in the waves. Your identity, your very personality, completely erased by the darkness and the oil. So out of a crew of nearly 1,200 men, this was the terrifying new reality for almost 900 of them, just thrown from their sinking ship into this vast, unforgiving sea. They were wounded, they were alone, and they were completely invisible to the rest of the world. Now, to understand how they ended up in this nightmare, we have to go back to the beginning, to a mission that was shrouded in the deepest secrecy. To really get the weight of this tragedy, you have to understand the ship herself, because this was no ordinary vessel. She was an absolute legend in the Pacific Fleet. Yeah, the USS Indianapolis was a legend, a battle-hardened heavy cruiser, and she was the flagship for Admiral Spruance's mighty Fifth Fleet. I mean, she had earned 10 battle stars, surviving some of the absolute fiercest fighting in the Pacific, all the way from the Aleutian Islands to Okinawa. This was a proud ship with a history of victory, not a vessel you'd ever imagine just getting lost at sea. After barely surviving a kamikaze attack and getting repairs, the Indianapolis was handed a brand new top-secret assignment, and the urgency was off the charts. As Captain McVeigh told his crew, this mission was critical to ending the war. They pushed that ship so hard they actually set a speed record, sailing from San Francisco to Tinian Island in just 10 days. And what was that secret cargo? Well, it was the core components of the atomic bomb. In what has to be one of the most tragic ironies of the entire war, the Indianapolis successfully delivered the weapon that would finally bring it all to an end. But she and most of her crew would never live to see the peace that they helped make possible. After dropping off her cargo, she began her final voyage, sailing unescorted, heading to the Philippines. The night of July 30th was dark, moonless, and despite intelligence reports that warned of Japanese submarines in the area, the ship wasn't performing defensive zigzagging maneuvers. And then, just after midnight, disaster struck with a speed that is just shocking. The sheer velocity of this thing, I mean, look at this, it is staggering. 2 torpedoes slammed into the starboard side. The first one blew the bow clean off. The second one hit midship right near the fuel tanks. The explosions were catastrophic. In less time than it takes to make a cup of coffee, all power was gone. The radio rooms were obliterated. No distress call could get out. In Captain McVeigh's own words, the attack was instant, completely disorienting. He scrambled to the bridge, but the damage was it was irreversible. The ship immediately started listing, going down fast by the head. There was no time, none, for an organized abandoned ship. Men were either blown overboard by the blast or had to jump into the burning, oil-slicked water as the deck literally rolled out from under their feet. Just let that sink in for a moment. 12 minutes. That's all it took for a 610-foot-long heavy cruiser, a massive symbol of American naval power, to completely vanish from the surface of the ocean. Gone. And here is the most terrifying reality of all. Nobody was coming for them. The Navy had no idea the Indianapolis was at the bottom of the sea. For the 900 men now floating in the dark, a new and frankly far more horrific ordeal was just about to begin. As the sun rose on that first day, the survivors, scattered in these small, terrified groups, they began to grasp the true unfolding horror of their situation. The immediate threats were just overwhelming. Many men had horrific burns, skin blistered and peeling right off. Others had broken limbs, deep gashes from being thrown around by the explosions, and every single one of them had swallowed that thick, foul-tasting fuel oil, which made them vomit constantly, accelerating their dehydration at a terrifying rate. The Kapok life vests, their only hope, soon became waterlogged and heavy, barely keeping their chins above the waves as exhaustion just completely took over. During the day, the tropical sun was a merciless enemy, burning their skin and eyes, and then at night, the cold brought on this violent, uncontrollable shivering, hypothermia setting in. But the physical suffering, as immense as it was soon matched by something even worse, a devastating psychological breakdown. And the lack of fresh water, that became the single most destructive force out there. As Dr. Haynes saw firsthand, men were driven absolutely mad by a kind of thirst you and I can't possibly imagine, and they began to drink the seawater. Saltwater poisoning is a death sentence. It triggers these extreme, vivid hallucinations. Men would see phantom islands on the horizon, absolutely convinced they could swim to safety. Worse, some hallucinated that their own sunken ship was right below the surface, a ghost ship filled with freshwater fountains. They'd say goodbye to their friends and just swim down, never to return. The living had to just float there and watch as their shipmates, their friends, were killed not by an enemy, but by their own broken minds. And as the men grew weaker, physically and mentally, a new horror began to emerge from the depths. The scent of blood and death, carried for miles on the current, had drawn some very unwanted attention. Survivor Altha Haven's account is just chilling in its simplicity. The sharks started bothering. At first, they were just observers, these silent fins cutting through the water. But as men started dying from their injuries, from dehydration, the sharks began to feed. Now, this wasn't some sudden frenzy like you see in the movies. No, this was a sustained 4-day nightmare of psychological warfare. The men would form circles, trying to keep the dead and the badly wounded in the middle. They'd kick and scream to try and scare the sharks away, but their energy was fading fast. The sharks, though, they were patient. They would bump a man, almost like they were testing his strength. They preyed on anyone who drifted away from the group, so for days on end, the survivors had to float and listen to the muffled screams of a shipmate being pulled under, sometimes just feet away, knowing there was absolutely nothing they could do, and that they could be next at any second. It was a slow, agonizing lottery of death. This is the very definition of psychological terror. It's the absolute loss of hope. You have men fighting off sharks one minute, and then the next, they're fighting off their own hallucinating friends who are trying to steal their life vests in a fit of madness. They were trapped in a world where the sea, the sun, their own minds, and the creatures below were all conspiring to kill them in the slowest, most agonizing way imaginable. By the fourth day, the number of survivors had dwindled dramatically. The men still alive were right on the edge of death. Rescue, when it finally came, was a complete accident. The rescue began with this incredible chain of pure dumb luck. Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn was flying a routine patrol when a trailing wire antenna on his plane broke. As he went to the back of the plane to deal with it, he happened to look down at the ocean and spotted this massive oil slick. Thinking it might be a damaged enemy sub, he flew lower. And it was then that his crew saw them, heads bobbing in the water, men waving their arms as frantically as they could. A massive rescue operation was launched immediately. One pilot, a guy named Adrian Marks, actually defied orders by landing his huge PBY Catalina seaplane in the open ocean to pull the most desperate men from the water, saving 56 lives right there. But after 4.5 days of unspeakable horror, only 316 men were still alive to be saved. The final toll, it's just devastating. 880 sailors and Marines were lost. The sinking of the USS Indianapolis remains the single greatest loss of life at sea from a single ship in the entire history of the U.S. Navy. But for the men who survived, the ordeal wasn't over. A new kind of battle was just beginning. The Navy, deeply embarrassed by the failure to even realize the ship was missing and by the sheer scale of the loss, needed someone to blame. They needed a scapegoat. And in a deeply controversial move, they court-martialed Captain Charles McVeigh III, holding him responsible for the loss of his ship. The question of who truly bears the blame for this unbelievable tragedy, well, it continues to be debated to this day, a final, bitter chapter in one of the most terrifying survival stories of World War II.